The early morning sun cast long shadows across the busy streets of downtown as Marcus Thompson walked toward the construction site where he had worked for the past 5 years. At 32 years old, he had already earned a reputation as one of the most reliable project supervisors in the company. His tall frame moved with purpose, dressed in his usual work attire, sturdy boots, khaki work pants, and a bright yellow safety vest over his blue company shirt. The autumn air felt crisp against his face as he reached the security gate at 6:45 a.m., 15 minutes earlier than required, just as he did every morning. The security guard, Tom, greeted him with a familiar wave. "Morning, Mr. Thompson. Coffee's already brewing in the site office." "Thanks, Tom. How's your daughter doing with those college applications?" Marcus asked, showing his genuine interest in his coworkers' lives. It was this kind of attention to people that had earned him respect among both workers and management. Inside the site office, Marcus reviewed the day's schedule while sipping his coffee. The Johnson Tower project was entering its crucial phase, with concrete pouring scheduled for the next week. He had worked hard to reach this position, starting as a general laborer and studying construction management in night school. His mother had always taught him that education and hard work were the keys to success. At 7:15 a.m., workers began arriving in groups. Marcus watched through the office window as they gathered for the morning briefing. He saw familiar faces: Dave from electrical, Sarah from plumbing, and the new batch of workers who had joined last month. The site was like a small community, with people from different backgrounds working together to build something meaningful. Marcus gathered his papers and stepped out to conduct the morning meeting. The workers formed a semicircle around him, their breath visible in the cool morning air. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice clear and professional. "Today we're focusing on the East Wing framework. Safety first. I want everyone wearing proper PPE at all times." As he went through the day's assignments, Marcus noticed two new faces in the crowd. They were young men, probably in their early 20s, looking slightly nervous on what was likely their first day. After the briefing, he approached them with a welcoming smile. "You must be Kevin and Miguel," he said, extending his hand. "I reviewed your applications last week. Welcome to the team." The young men's faces lit up, surprised and pleased that the supervisor knew their names. "Thank you, sir," Kevin replied, adjusting his hard hat. "We're excited to learn." "Just remember," Marcus advised, "everyone here started somewhere. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Safety and learning come first on my site." Throughout the morning, Marcus moved across the construction site with practiced ease. He checked progress on different sections, signed delivery receipts for new materials, and stopped occasionally to offer guidance to workers. His tablet contained detailed project plans, which he consulted frequently to ensure everything was on schedule. During a quick inspection of the foundation work, Marcus spotted a potential issue with the rebar placement. Instead of simply pointing out the problem, he took time to explain the correction needed to the crew. "See how this section isn't quite aligned?" he demonstrated, kneeling down to point out the specific area. "We need to adjust this before the concrete pour next week. Let me show you the blueprint." By late morning, the site was buzzing with activity. The sound of power tools, shouted instructions, and heavy machinery filled the air. Marcus had just finished a phone call with the project client when he noticed dark clouds gathering overhead. He immediately began implementing wet weather protocols, ensuring sensitive materials were covered and electrical equipment was properly protected. As he helped workers secure a tarp over some exposed materials, Marcus felt pride in his work. He thought about his father, who had also worked in construction before passing away 10 years ago. "Always lead by example," his father used to say. Those words had shaped Marcus's approach to his career and life. The morning was productive and smooth running, just like countless others before it. Marcus had no way of knowing that the peaceful routine of his workday was about to be shattered. As he headed toward the equipment storage area for his usual lunch break inspection, the wheels of prejudice and misunderstanding were already in motion, about to test not just his patience, but the very foundations of justice and dignity he had worked so hard to build. The clock showed 12:30 p.m., and everything was about to change. The afternoon sun beat down on the construction site as Marcus walked toward the equipment storage area. He always checked the expensive tools during his lunch break. It was part of his daily routine as a supervisor. His stomach growled slightly. The sandwich in his office would have to wait a few more minutes. As he turned the corner near the storage containers, Marcus noticed something unusual. The padlock on container B seemed different. He moved closer, his work boots crunching on the gravel. Yes, something was definitely wrong. The lock showed scratch marks around its keyhole. Marcus pulled out his phone to document the damage, following company protocol. Unknown to Marcus, Mrs. Henderson, who lived in the house across from the construction site, was watching through her kitchen window. She had moved to the neighborhood just 2 weeks ago and wasn't familiar with the construction workers. Seeing a man examining the storage containers made her nervous. Without hesitating, she picked up her phone and dialed 911. "There's a suspicious person tampering with containers at the construction site," she reported, her voice trembling slightly. "He's wearing a yellow vest, but I don't trust it. He might be trying to steal something." Back at the site, Marcus had just finished taking pictures of the lock when he heard voices from inside the container. His heart rate quickened. Someone was definitely in there. A site supervisor, he was responsible for everything and everyone on the property. He pulled out his walkie-talkie. "Security, this is Marcus. I need backup at Container B, possible break-in," he spoke quietly into the device. Tom's voice crackled back immediately. "On my way, Mr. Thompson." Marcus moved closer to the container, making sure to stay alert. He could hear rustling sounds from inside. "This is the site supervisor," he called out firmly. "Come out now, and we can handle this properly." The sounds inside stopped. Then, to Marcus's surprise, he heard young, frightened voices. "We're sorry, Mr. Thompson." It was Kevin, one of the new workers from the morning. We didn't mean to." Before Marcus could respond, the screech of police sirens filled the air. 2 patrol cars pulled up to the site entrance, their lights flashing. Marcus turned to see 4 officers jumping out of their vehicles, hands already on their weapons. His heart sank as he noticed they weren't heading toward the container. They were heading straight for him. "Hands where we can see them," one officer shouted, his voice aggressive. Marcus immediately raised his hands, his supervisor's badge swinging from his neck. "Officers, there seems to be a misunderstanding," Marcus said calmly, though his heart was racing. "I'm the site supervisor. There's been a break-in, and I was just—" "Stop talking and turn around," another officer commanded, cutting him off. Marcus could see more workers gathering at a distance, watching the scene unfold with confused and concerned expressions. Tom, the security guard, came running from the main gate. "Officers, wait. That's Mr. Thompson, our supervisor." But the police weren't listening. 2 officers approached Marcus with their hands on their holsters, while another spoke into his radio. "Suspect located at the scene, wearing construction gear, possibly stolen." Marcus felt his face grow hot with anger and humiliation. "My ID is right here," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "My badge clearly shows." "I said stop talking." The first officer snapped, moving closer. By now, several workers had their phones out, recording the incident. Kevin and his friend had emerged from the container, their faces pale with shock as they watched their supervisor being treated like a criminal. Sarah, the plumbing supervisor, stepped forward. "This is ridiculous. He's our boss. Check his ID." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Marcus stood perfectly still, his hands raised, aware that any sudden movement could make the situation worse. His mind raced through his rights, his training, everything he knew about staying safe in these situations. The lessons his parents had taught him about dealing with law enforcement echoed in his head. Stay calm, speak clearly, make no sudden moves. The next few moments would prove crucial, not just for Marcus, but for everyone watching. As one officer reached for his handcuffs, the sound of more sirens approached in the distance. The situation was about to escalate from a misunderstanding to something much more serious, and Marcus knew his next words and actions could change everything. The situation at the construction site had turned into a scene that drew everyone's attention. More police cars arrived, their sirens cutting through the usual construction noise. Workers stopped their tasks, gathering in small groups, many still holding their phones up to record what was happening. Marcus remained perfectly still, his hands in the air, the supervisor's badge around his neck moving slightly in the breeze. Sweat formed on his forehead despite the cool weather. He could feel his heart pounding against his chest as the officers surrounded him. "Listen, officers," Marcus tried once more, his voice steady but strained. "There's been a mistake. I'm Marcus Thompson, the site supervisor. The real problem is... On your knees, interrupted the lead officer, Officer Brooks, according to his nameplate. His hand remained firmly on his holster as he barked orders. Do it now. Tom, the security guard, was frantically waving Marcus's employee file in the air. I have his documentation right here. Please, just look at it. But the officers ignored him, creating a tight circle around Marcus. Sarah, the plumbing supervisor, had pulled out her phone and was already dialing the construction company's main office. Yes, this is Sarah Martinez at the Johnson Tower site. She spoke urgently into her phone. We need Mr. Davidson here immediately. The police are harassing Marcus. The two young workers, Kevin and Miguel, had emerged fully from the container. Their faces showed a mix of guilt and horror as they watched their supervisor being treated like a criminal, all because he had caught them taking an unauthorized break in the storage unit. It's our fault, Kevin said shakily to Miguel. We need to tell them what happened. But before they could step forward, another officer stopped them. Stay back. This is a police matter now. Marcus slowly lowered himself to his knees, the gravel digging through his work pants. His mind raced with thoughts of his family, his career, and the unfairness of it all. 5 years of building respect on this site, and in mere minutes, he was being treated like a common thief. The workers continued recording, their phones capturing every moment. Dave, the head electrician, stepped forward. This is wrong. He's trying to show you his ID. Just check it. Officer Brooks turned to the crowd. Everyone stay back, or you'll be arrested for interfering with police business. A new voice cut through the tension. I'm the one who called. It was Mrs. Henderson, hurrying across the street from her house. I saw him tampering with the container, but, she faltered, seeing Marcus's supervisor badge and the crowd of workers supporting him. I might have made a mistake. But her words came too late. Officer Brooks had already pulled out his handcuffs. Marcus Thompson, you're under arrest for suspected burglary and trespassing. Trespassing? Marcus repeated in disbelief. I've worked here for 5 years. My office is right there. He nodded toward the site office, where his name was clearly visible on the door. More workers had gathered now, their voices rising in protest. The scene had drawn attention from passing cars, some slowing down to watch. The construction site had turned into an impromptu arena of injustice playing out in broad daylight. Sarah's voice rose above the others. Mr. Davidson is on his way. He's bringing the company lawyer. She held her phone up like a shield, still recording everything. Kevin finally broke free from the officer holding him back. Please listen. Mr. Thompson was investigating because we were the ones in the container. We shouldn't have been in there. He's the supervisor. Officer Brooks hesitated for a moment, but instead of checking Marcus's ID, he reached for his radio. Dispatch, requesting backup for crowd control. Situation becoming hostile. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, trying to maintain his composure. He could hear the murmurs of his workers, the clicking of phone cameras, the crackle of police radios. Everything he had worked for was being threatened because someone had made assumptions about him based on his appearance. The sound of another vehicle approaching made everyone turn. A black SUV was pulling up to the site entrance. Marcus recognized it immediately. It was James Davidson, the company owner. But would his arrival be enough to stop what was already in motion? The next few moments would determine not just Marcus's immediate fate, but potentially the course of his entire future. James Davidson's black SUV came to a quick stop near the growing crowd. The company owner, a tall man in his 50s wearing a business suit, jumped out before his vehicle had fully stopped, but even as he rushed forward, Officer Brooks was already placing handcuffs on Marcus's wrists. Stop this immediately. Davidson's voice boomed across the construction site. I'm the owner of this company, and that man is my site supervisor. The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked around Marcus's wrists. He winced, not from physical pain, but from the shame of being handled like a criminal in front of his entire crew. His yellow safety vest, once a symbol of his authority, now felt like a target on his back. Sir, stay back, another officer warned Davidson. This is a police matter. Davidson pulled out his phone, his face red with anger. I'm calling our company lawyer right now. This is completely unacceptable. He dialed quickly while walking closer. Sarah, keep recording everything. Mrs. Henderson, the neighbor who had made the initial call, now stood with her hands covering her mouth. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered, but her words were lost in the chaos. Officer Brooks pulled Marcus to his feet roughly. The supervisor's hard hat fell off, rolling away in the gravel. Some workers gasped as they watched their respected leader being manhandled. "Check his ID," Kevin screamed, tears now running down his young face. "Please, just check his ID. We were the ones in the container. He was just doing his job." Miguel held his friend back, knowing that rushing forward would only make things worse. Both young men felt the heavy weight of guilt, knowing their unauthorized break had started this whole mess. Tom, the security guard, had been working at the site for 10 years. Never had he seen anything like this. He held up his phone, making sure to capture every detail. "I got the security cameras running too," he announced loudly. "Everything is being recorded." Marcus stood straight despite the handcuffs, maintaining his dignity even as Officer Brooks began reciting his rights. "You have the right to remain silent." "I need to secure the site," Marcus said firmly, thinking of his responsibilities even now. "There are safety protocols." "Shut up," one of the officers snapped, grabbing his arm tighter. Sarah Martinez stepped forward, her phone still recording. "We all work here. Look at his office. His name is on the door. Marcus Thompson, site supervisor." Davidson was now on the phone with the company lawyer, speaking rapidly. "Get down here now. They're arresting my site supervisor without cause. Yes, right now." He turned to the officers. "Our lawyer will meet us at the station. This is going to be a huge problem for your department." The workers watched helplessly as Marcus was led toward the police car. Some had tears in their eyes, others showed anger on their faces. Dave, the electrician, threw his hard hat on the ground in frustration. "This isn't right," he shouted. "We're all witnesses. He did nothing wrong." As they reached the police car, Marcus turned to face his crew one last time. Despite everything, his voice remained calm and professional. "Sarah, take charge of the site. Make sure everyone stays safe. Dave, secure the electrical work. Kevin and Miguel, report to the office." Even in handcuffs, he was still thinking like a supervisor, still caring for his workers and the site. This simple act of leadership brought tears to several workers' eyes. Officer Brooks pushed Marcus's head down, forcing him into the back of the patrol car. The door slammed shut with a final thud that seemed to echo across the construction site. Davidson ran to his SUV. "I'm following them to the station. Sarah, send all the videos to our lawyer. Tom, get the security footage ready." He looked at the gathered workers. "Don't worry, we're going to fix this." As the police car drove away with Marcus inside, the construction site fell into an uneasy silence. The workers stood frozen, their phones still raised, recording the departing vehicles. Mrs. Henderson had retreated back to her house, the weight of her mistake visible in her hurried steps. Kevin turned to Miguel, his voice breaking. "We have to tell everyone what really happened. We can't let Mr. Thompson take the fall for this." The sun continued to shine on the half-built Johnson Tower, but the pride and joy of the morning's work had been replaced by a heavy cloud of injustice and anger. The day was far from over, and the fight for Marcus's freedom and dignity was just beginning. News of Marcus Thompson's arrest spread through the city like wildfire. Within hours of the incident, videos taken by the construction workers had appeared on social media. People shared them thousands of times, with comments expressing outrage at the unfair treatment of a hard-working supervisor. At the police station, James Davidson paced in the waiting area. The company lawyer, Michael Chen, sat nearby, typing rapidly on his laptop. They had been there for 3 hours, demanding Marcus's release. "This is completely unacceptable," Chen said, looking up from his computer. "We have over 20 witness statements, security camera footage, and multiple videos showing that Mr. Thompson was simply doing his job." Back at the construction site, Sarah Martinez had gathered all the workers in the main office. The room was packed, with people standing shoulder to shoulder. The usual sounds of construction had fallen silent as work stopped completely. "Listen up, everyone," Sarah announced, standing on a chair to be seen. "The company is backing Marcus 100%, but we need to do our part too. If you took any videos or photos, send them to this email address." She wrote an address on the whiteboard. Kevin and Miguel sat in the corner, both looking miserable. Finally, Kevin stood up. "This is our fault," he said, his voice shaking. "We were having an unauthorized break in the storage container. Mr. Thompson was just checking because he saw the damaged lock. He was doing his job, protecting the site." Instead of anger, the workers showed support. Dave, the electrician, put a hand on Kevin's shoulder. "You're doing the right thing by telling the truth. We'll include your statement in the evidence." Outside the police station, a crowd had begun to gather. Construction workers from other sites had heard about the incident and came to show their support. Many held signs reading "Free Marcus Thompson" and "Stop Racial Profiling." Local news vans pulled up, their reporters eager to cover the story. A reporter approached Tom, the security guard, who had arrived with the security camera footage. "Mr. Thompson is the best supervisor I've worked with in my 10 years here," Tom told the reporter, his voice firm. "He arrives early every day, knows everyone's name, and always puts safety first. This arrest is a disgrace." Inside the station, Marcus sat in a holding cell, still wearing his work clothes. His yellow safety vest had been taken away, but he still had his company ID badge. He held it in his hands, looking at the photo that showed him smiling, proud of his position. Mrs. Henderson, the neighbor who had made the 911 call, arrived at the station with her husband. Her face showed clear distress as she approached the front desk. "I need to make a statement," she said, wringing her hands. "I made a terrible mistake. I'm the one who called the police, but I was wrong. That man is clearly the site supervisor. I jumped to conclusions." On social media, the hashtag Justice for Marcus was trending. People shared stories of similar experiences, and construction companies across the city posted messages of support. The incident had touched a nerve, highlighting an ongoing problem that many had faced. Back at the construction site, Sarah's phone rang. It was Marcus's mother, Mrs. Thompson. Sarah put the phone on speaker so everyone could hear. "Thank you all for supporting my son," Mrs. Thompson said, her voice strong despite her worry. "Marcus has worked hard his whole life. He never let anyone tell him he couldn't succeed, and he won't let this stop him either." The workers listened in respectful silence. Many wiped tears from their eyes. This wasn't just about their supervisor anymore. It was about standing up for what was right. James Davidson finally emerged from the police station to address the growing crowd. Camera lights flashed as he stepped up to the microphones. "Marcus Thompson is not just an employee, he's one of our best leaders," Davidson declared. "We will not rest until he is released and those responsible for this injustice are held accountable. Our company stands behind him completely." The crowd cheered, their voices echoing off the building walls. Construction workers raised their hard hats in solidarity. News cameras captured it all, broadcasting the scene across the city. Inside the station, Marcus could hear the chants through his cell window. A mix of emotions crossed his face: gratitude for the support, sadness at the situation, and determination to fight for justice. The day wasn't over yet, and his story was far from finished. The morning after Marcus's arrest, the police station's conference room was filled with tension. On one side sat Marcus, now wearing a clean shirt brought by his mother, along with Michael Chen, the company lawyer, and James Davidson. On the other side sat Officer Brooks, the police chief, and the department's legal representative. "Let's review the facts," Chen said, opening a thick folder. "You arrested a clearly identified site supervisor, wearing a company uniform and badge, at his own workplace. You ignored multiple witnesses, refused to check his ID, and declined to verify his employment, which would have taken less than 1 minute." The police chief shifted uncomfortably in his chair as Chen played videos from workers' phones on a laptop. The footage clearly showed Marcus trying to explain his position, while officers ignored him. Outside the station, the crowd had grown even larger. Construction workers from 20 different companies had taken the day off to show support. They formed a peaceful line along the sidewalk, many wearing yellow safety vests like Marcus's to show solidarity. Kevin and Miguel stood with the protesters, holding a large sign that read, "Mr. Thompson was protecting us." They have given official statements to both the police and the company's legal team, explaining how Marcus had caught them taking an unauthorized break in the storage container. "The truth is," Kevin told a news reporter, his voice stronger now, Mr. Thompson was doing exactly what a good supervisor should do. He saw something suspicious and investigated it. If anyone should have been in trouble that day, it was us, not him. Back in the conference room, Chen played the security camera footage. The clear, time-stamped video showed Marcus performing his regular security check just as he had done every day for the past 5 years. Furthermore, Chen continued, "We have Mrs. Henderson's new statement admitting she made assumptions based on racial bias." He placed another document on the table. She has officially retracted her complaint and apologized for the false report. Marcus sat quietly, his hands folded on the table. He thought about his father's words from years ago. Sometimes you have to stand up not just for yourself, but for everyone who might face the same injustice after you. Sarah Martinez had organized a support team at the construction site. Workers took turns attending the protest while others kept the site running safely, just as Marcus would have wanted. She had created a website sharing Marcus's story, which had already received thousands of supportive messages. "You have exactly 1 hour to release Mr. Thompson and drop all charges," Chen said firmly to the police chief. "After that, we're filing a civil rights lawsuit, and believe me, you won't like the media attention that follows." The police chief whispered something to his legal representative, who nodded slowly. Officer Brooks stared at the table, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the room. Meanwhile, Mrs. Thompson sat in the waiting area, surrounded by other construction workers' families who had come to support her. She held a framed photo of Marcus at his graduation from construction management school, his smile bright and hopeful. "My son," she told the others, "has never let anyone stop him from doing what's right. He worked his way up from nothing, earned his education at night school, and became a leader. This incident won't define him, his response to it will." The department's legal representative finally spoke up. "We are prepared to release Mr. Thompson immediately and drop all charges." He slid a document across the table. "We also offer our sincere apologies for this incident." Chen read through the paper carefully. "This is just the beginning," he said. "We expect a full investigation into the officers involved and department-wide training to prevent future incidents like this." James Davidson stood up. "Marcus is more than just an employee to our company. He represents everything we value: hard work, leadership, and integrity. We won't stop until proper changes are made to prevent this from happening to anyone else." Marcus finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "I accept the apology, but I agree with Mr. Chen. This isn't just about me. It's about making sure no other worker has to face this kind of treatment while doing their job." As they prepared to leave the conference room, the sounds of cheering could be heard from outside. The crowd had spotted them through the windows, and the support was overwhelming. Marcus straightened his shoulders, ready to face both the cameras and the responsibility of turning this incident into meaningful change. The battle was partly won, but the fight for real justice was just beginning. 1 week after Marcus Thompson's arrest, the police department's internal affairs office was busier than usual. Detective Maria Rodriguez sat at her desk, surrounded by stacks of files. She had been assigned to investigate not just Marcus's case, but also to review Officer Brooks's entire service record. "This is worse than we thought," she told her supervisor, pointing at her computer screen. "In the past 3 years, Officer Brooks has received 15 complaints about similar incidents. All of them involved minority workers at their job sites. The investigation had started because of the viral videos and public pressure, but it was revealing much deeper problems." Detective Rodriguez printed another report and added it to her growing pile of evidence. At the construction site, things were slowly returning to normal. Marcus was back at work, his authority now even more respected by his crew. Workers from other construction companies often stopped by to shake his hand, telling him how his case had inspired them to speak up about their own experiences. Kevin and Miguel had become some of his strongest supporters. The young workers now arrived early each day, eager to learn from the supervisor who had handled such a difficult situation with such dignity. "Mr. Thompson," Kevin said one morning, "thank you for not being angry with us about the container incident. We've learned so much from watching how you dealt with everything." Marcus smiled at the young man. "Sometimes the best lessons come from our mistakes," he replied. "What matters is how we learn from them and help others avoid the same problems." Back at the police station, Officer Brooks sat nervously in front of the Internal Affairs Board. 5 senior officers looked at him across a long table, their faces serious as they reviewed the evidence. "Officer Brooks," the board chairman said, "we found a disturbing pattern in your arrest records. Can you explain why you consistently refuse to verify the identity and employment of individuals at their workplaces?" Brooks shifted in his chair, his confidence from the day of Marcus's arrest completely gone. The evidence against him was clear and overwhelming. Meanwhile, at City Hall, the mayor called a special meeting to address police training and procedures. James Davidson and Marcus were invited to speak about their experiences and suggest changes. "What happened to me shouldn't happen to anyone," Marcus told the city council members. "Every worker deserves to feel safe and respected at their job, regardless of their appearance." The company lawyer, Michael Chen, presented a list of recommended changes: mandatory ID verification before arrests at workplaces, better training about racial bias, and new procedures for handling workplace complaints. Mrs. Henderson, who had made the original 911 call, had become an unexpected ally. She now spoke at community meetings about the dangers of making assumptions based on race. "I made a terrible mistake that day," she told a group at the community center. "But thanks to Mr. Thompson's forgiveness and guidance, I'm learning to be a better neighbor and a better person." Detective Rodriguez's investigation continued to uncover more cases. She created a detailed timeline showing how Officer Brooks' behavior had gone unchecked for years. Other officers had noticed but stayed quiet, following an unwritten code of silence. "This stops now," the police chief announced at a press conference. "We're implementing new training programs and creating a special unit to handle workplace-related calls. Every officer will be required to complete additional training on racial bias and proper identification procedures." Sarah Martinez had started a support group for workers who faced similar situations. They met weekly at the construction site after work, sharing stories and discussing solutions. "Marcus showed us that standing up for justice doesn't mean losing your dignity," she told the group. "His case is helping change things for everyone." The internal affairs investigation finally reached its conclusion. Detective Rodriguez presented her findings to the police board. Officer Brooks would be suspended without pay. 3 other officers would need retraining. The department would create new guidelines for workplace investigations. All officers would wear body cameras during every interaction. A civilian review board would oversee future complaints. Marcus read the report in his site office, surrounded by his crew. The changes weren't perfect, but they were a start. He looked out his window at the construction site, where workers of all backgrounds worked together safely and respectfully. "This is what progress looks like," he told his team. "Small steps that lead to bigger changes. We keep building, not just structures, but better ways of treating each other." The investigation was ending, but its impact was just beginning to spread across the city, changing policies and attitudes one step at a time. 6 months after the incident that changed everything, Marcus Thompson stood on the stage of the city's main conference center. He adjusted his tie, looking out at the crowd of construction workers, police officers, city officials, and community members who had gathered for the first Building Bridges conference. "Welcome, everyone," Marcus began, his voice strong and clear. "6 months ago, I was wrongfully arrested at my own construction site. Today, we're not here to dwell on that incident, but to celebrate the changes it helped create." In the front row, Mrs. Thompson watched her son with proud tears in her eyes. Next to her sat James Davidson, Sarah Martinez, and even Mrs. Henderson, who had become an active supporter of community police reform. The conference room walls displayed large photos showing the positive changes of the past months. Police officers attending cultural training sessions, construction workers leading community workshops, and new signs at work sites explaining workers' rights and identification procedures. Kevin and Miguel, now promoted to team leaders thanks to Marcus's mentoring, helped pass out booklets containing the new city guidelines for workplace investigations. Both young men wore supervisor badges of their own, earned through hard work and dedication. "Our city has made real progress," Marcus continued. "Every construction site now has clear identification protocols. Police officers must follow new procedures for workplace visits. But most importantly, people are talking to each other, understanding each other better." Officer Brooks' replacement, Officer Maria Chen, stood at the back of the room in her uniform. She had been specifically chosen for the construction site patrol area because of her background in community relations. She nodded as Marcus spoke, knowing the importance of the changes. In the past 6 months, Marcus shared with the audience, not a single construction worker in our city has been wrongfully arrested at their workplace. Our new safety protocols have been adopted by 30 other cities across the country. Sarah Martinez stepped up to the podium next, holding up a thick binder. This is our new training manual, she announced. Created by construction workers and police officers working together. It's being used to train both new officers and site supervisors. The Johnson Tower project, where everything had started, was now complete. Its grand opening was scheduled for the following week, but it had already become a symbol of positive change in the community. Marcus pointed to a large screen showing photos of the tower. That building represents more than just construction. It shows what we can achieve when we work together, respect each other, and stand up for what's right. Mrs. Henderson stood up to share her story. My mistake could have ruined a man's life, she said, her voice shaking slightly. Instead, thanks to Marcus's forgiveness and leadership, it helped create positive change. Now I know all the construction workers in my neighborhood by name. James Davidson announced new company policies that were being adopted across the industry. Every worker gets a photo ID with a QR code that can be easily scanned to verify employment. We've also created a worker protection fund to help anyone facing similar situations. The police chief stepped forward to share updates on the department's progress. Our entire force has completed the new training program. Complaints are down by 70%. We're working with the community, not against it. Near the end of the conference, Marcus unveiled the new Thompson Rule, a law requiring police to verify workplace identification before making any arrests on job sites. The crowd stood and applauded as he showed the signed document. But the most important change, Marcus said as the applause died down, is in how we see each other. Every person deserves respect, whether they're wearing a hard hat, a police uniform, or everyday clothes. After the conference, Marcus walked back to the construction site with his mother. The setting sun cast long shadows across the finished Johnson Tower, its windows gleaming gold in the evening light. Your father would be so proud, Mrs. Thompson said, squeezing her son's hand. Marcus looked at the new sign posted at the site entrance, showing clear procedures for identifying workers and handling workplace concerns. Below it was a simple message. Everyone deserves to feel safe at work. We've made a good start, Marcus replied, watching workers from the next project heading home for the day, each wearing their clear photo IDs. The real work is making sure these changes last. As he looked at the tower standing tall against the sky, Marcus knew that some buildings were made of more than just steel and concrete. Some, like the bridges they built between communities, were made of understanding, respect, and the courage to stand up for what's right. The end was really just another beginning.